When I found divorce papers hidden inside the medical insurance folder, I realized the kidney I'd given my husband wasn't the only organ he'd ripped out of me. My name is Catherine, and at 48, I thought my life in Minneapolis was everything I dreamed of as a young woman. I was a registered nurse at Abbott Northwestern Hospital, married to Daniel for 15 years. We lived in a charming Victorian house in the Whittier neighborhood, with hardwood floors that creaked in all the familiar places and a front porch where we'd spent countless summer evenings watching our neighbors walk their dogs. Daniel was my anchor, a software engineer who wore the same brand of jeans for a decade because he hated shopping, who made me coffee every morning in the Minnesota Wild mug I'd bought him for his birthday, and who still reached for my hand during movies even after all these years together. Our life had a comfortable rhythm: work, home, weekend trips to Lake Superior, and quiet Sunday mornings reading the Minneapolis Star-Tribune while snow fell outside our kitchen window. The first crack in my perfect world appeared on a Tuesday morning in February, when Daniel stumbled coming out of the shower and couldn't catch his balance. I found him sitting on the bathroom floor, looking confused and exhausted. "I think I just got up too fast," he said, but his skin had a grayish pallor that made my nursing instincts scream warnings. Over the following weeks, Daniel's energy evaporated like morning frost. He'd fall asleep at his computer during work calls, nap after dinner, and wake up each morning looking like he hadn't slept at all. When he started complaining of back pain and decreased appetite, I finally convinced him to see Dr. Peterson, his primary care physician. The blood work results came back on a Friday afternoon in March when the last stubborn snow was finally melting into muddy puddles. Dr. Peterson called us both into his office, and I knew from his expression that our world was about to change forever. "Daniel's kidney function is severely compromised," he explained, pulling up lab results on his computer screen. "His creatinine levels indicate advanced chronic kidney disease. Without intervention, he'll need dialysis within months, possibly weeks." The room felt like it was tilting. I reached for Daniel's hand, finding it cold and trembling. "What kind of intervention?" I asked, though I already knew the answer from my years in healthcare. "Kidney transplant. We can put him on the waiting list immediately, but—" Dr. Peterson's pause was heavy with unspoken reality. The waiting list stretched for years, and Daniel's condition was deteriorating rapidly. "Test me," I said before Dr. Peterson could finish explaining our options. Daniel turned to look at me, his eyes wide with shock. "Catherine, no. I can't ask you to—" "You're not asking," I interrupted. "I'm volunteering. We're married. This is what we do for each other." That night, lying in bed listening to the March wind rattle our old windows, Daniel held me closer than he had in months. "Are you sure about this?" he whispered into my hair. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," I whispered back. The compatibility testing took 3 weeks that felt like 3 years. I continued working my shifts at the hospital, but my mind was constantly elsewhere, running through medical scenarios and outcomes. My colleagues knew what was happening. Healthcare workers formed tight communities, and news travels fast. Everyone was supportive, bringing me extra coffee during long shifts and offering to cover my patients when I needed to attend medical appointments. During those weeks of waiting, something beautiful happened in our marriage. We talked more deeply than we had in years about our fears, our dreams, our gratitude for having found each other. Daniel would wake me up in the middle of the night just to tell me he loved me. We made plans for his recovery, the garden we'd plant together that spring, the anniversary trip to Ireland we'd always talked about but never taken. "After this is over, I'm going to spend every day showing you how grateful I am," he promised one evening as we walked around Lake Calhoun, watching the ice begin to break up along the shoreline. When Dr. Rodriguez, the transplant coordinator, called to tell us I was a perfect match, I actually dropped the phone. Daniel was in our kitchen making dinner, his first attempt at cooking in weeks, and when he saw my face, he immediately turned off the stove and rushed to my side. "Perfect match," I managed to say through tears of relief and joy. Daniel lifted me off my feet and spun me around our small kitchen, both of us crying and laughing at the same time. In that moment, I felt like we could conquer anything together. The surgery was scheduled for a Thursday in April, when the Minneapolis spring was finally asserting itself with patches of green grass and brave daffodils pushing through the thawed soil. I took medical leave from the hospital, and Daniel arranged for extended time off from his tech company. Those final weeks before surgery felt sacred somehow, like we were preparing for a ritual that would bind us together even more tightly than our wedding vows had. But there were tiny details that nagged at me, small inconsistencies I dismissed because I was so focused on the enormity of what we were facing. Daniel had become protective of his phone in a way that was completely unlike him. For 15 years, we'd shared everything: passwords, social media accounts, even each other's phones when one of us couldn't find our own. Suddenly, he was taking his phone to the bathroom, sleeping with it under his pillow, and turning the screen away from me when notifications popped up. When I asked about it, he'd laugh and say, "Just work stuff. You know how paranoid tech companies are about security." This made sense on the surface, but Daniel had never been secretive about work before. He'd complained about difficult clients and celebrated project completions, sharing the ups and downs of his professional life like he shared everything else. There were phone calls that ended abruptly when I entered the room, conversations that stopped mid-sentence, followed by quick, "I'll call you back" endings. When I asked who had called, Daniel would mention co-workers I'd never heard him talk about before, or old college friends who had supposedly reached out after hearing about his illness. The night before surgery, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about all the things that could go wrong, about the small percentage chance that something would happen to one of us on the operating table. Daniel seemed restless too, tossing and turning beside me until finally getting up to sit by our bedroom window. "What are you thinking about?" I asked, joining him on the window seat we'd installed when we first moved into the house. "Just everything," he said, not meeting my eyes. "How much my life is going to change, how much I owe you." There was something in his voice I couldn't identify, not gratitude exactly, but something heavier. Sadness, maybe, or regret. "You don't owe me anything," I said, taking his hand. "This is love, Daniel. This is what love looks like." He squeezed my hand but didn't respond, and we sat in silence, watching the pre-dawn darkness gradually lighten over our neighborhood. The morning of surgery arrived with unseasonably warm weather and bright sunshine streaming through our bedroom windows. I woke up before my alarm, my stomach churning with anxiety and anticipation. Daniel was already awake, staring at the ceiling with an expression I'd never seen before. "Ready?" I asked, though neither of us would ever be truly ready for something like this. "Ready," he said, but his voice sounded hollow. At the hospital, everything moved with the efficient choreography I knew from working there myself. We checked in at 5:30 in the morning, and the preoperative routine felt both familiar and surreal. I'd helped prepare hundreds of patients for surgery, but being on the other side of the process was disorienting. "You're incredible," Dr. E. Rodriguez told me as they prepared to wheel me toward the operating room. "Your husband is lucky to have someone who loves him this much." I looked at Daniel one last time before the anesthesia took hold. He was standing beside my gurney in his hospital gown, looking healthier than he had in months, just from knowing relief was finally coming. "I love you," I whispered. "I love you too," he replied. But something in his eyes looked like goodbye. The recovery was brutal in ways I hadn't fully prepared for, despite my medical background. Knowing intellectually that abdominal surgery is painful and actually experiencing the sensation of your muscles being cut and sewn back together are completely different things. I spent the first day floating in and out of consciousness, tethered to reality by the steady beep of monitors and the gentle voices of nurses I recognized from my own shifts. Daniel was recovering in the room next to mine, and according to the surgical team, both procedures had gone perfectly. His body was accepting the kidney beautifully, and my remaining kidney was compensating well. We were textbook cases, they said, success stories they'd share with future patients. On the second day, when the fog of pain medication began to lift enough for me to think clearly, I became aware of voices in the hallway outside my room. Daniel was talking to someone, a woman with a soft laugh that made something uncomfortable twist in my chest. I told myself it was probably one of the nurses, or maybe his sister Jennifer, who lived in Chicago but had promised to visit during his recovery. But then I heard the woman say something that made my blood turn to ice water. "I can't wait until this is all over and we don't have to pretend anymore." My hand found the call button, though I was shaking so badly I could barely press it. When Lisa, my favorite nurse from the day shift, appeared at my bedside, I asked her to help me sit up. Everything hurt, but I needed to see what was happening in the hallway. "Honey, you need to rest," Lisa said gently. "Your body just went through major trauma." "Please," I whispered. "I just need to see Daniel for a minute." She helped me to the edge of the bed, and through my partially open door, I could see into Daniel's room across the hall. He was sitting up in bed, looking better than he had in months, holding hands with a woman I'd never seen before. She was younger than me, probably in her late 30s, with sleek auburn hair and perfectly applied makeup, despite being in a hospital at 7 in the morning. She was wearing the gold bracelet Daniel had given me for our 10th anniversary, the one I'd thought I'd lost during our move last year. I watched in frozen horror as she leaned down to kiss him. Not a friendly peck or even a sisterly kiss, but the kind of deep, passionate kiss I thought belonged only to us. "Lisa," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Who is that woman?" Lisa followed my gaze, and I saw recognition flash across her face, followed immediately by discomfort. Catherine, I think you should talk to your husband about that." But before I could respond, Daniel looked up and saw me watching. For a split second, his face showed pure panic. Then he quickly whispered something to the woman, who immediately stepped out of view. I struggled back into bed, my surgical sight screaming in protest, and pretended to be asleep when Daniel appeared in my doorway minutes later. "Catherine? Sweetheart, how are you feeling?" I kept my eyes closed, focusing on keeping my breathing steady, despite the fact that my heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. He stood there for several minutes, and I could feel the weight of his presence in the room like a storm cloud. Finally he left, and I heard him speaking in low, urgent tones to someone on his phone in the hallway. "She saw us. No, I don't think she heard anything. We need to be more careful. Just give me a few more days to figure this out." The next 3 days in the hospital passed like a nightmare, wrapped in a fever dream. Daniel visited me regularly, bringing flowers from the hospital gift shop and get-well cards from our neighbors. He acted like the devoted husband he'd always been, but now I noticed things I'd been blind to before. How he checked his phone constantly, how he stepped into the hallway to take calls, how he never quite met my eyes when he told me he loved me. The woman didn't come back to his room while I was awake, but I caught glimpses of her in the parking lot when I was moved to a room with a window view. She drove a silver Lexus that I realized I'd seen in our neighborhood several times over the past few months. At the time, I'd assumed it belonged to one of our new neighbors. When they discharged us both on Sunday, Daniel was attentive and caring, helping me into the car, adjusting my seatbelt, making sure I had pillows positioned to protect my incision. But there was something performative about it now, like he was playing a role he'd rehearsed. "I'm so grateful for what you've done," he said as we drove home through the familiar streets of Minneapolis. "You saved my life, Catherine. I'll never be able to repay you." The words sounded practiced, like dialogue from a script. Our house felt different when we walked through the front door, smaller somehow, and filled with shadows I'd never noticed before. Daniel had arranged for a cleaning service while we were in the hospital, and everything was spotless, but there were subtle changes. A coffee cup in the dishwasher that neither of us had used, a different scent lingering in our bedroom, something floral and expensive that definitely wasn't my usual drugstore perfume. "You should rest," Daniel said, helping me settle into our bed. "I'll sleep in the guest room so I don't accidentally bump your incision during the night." This made perfect medical sense, but it felt like another small rejection added to a growing pile of evidence that something fundamental had changed between us. Over the next week, as my body slowly began to heal, I started paying attention to details I'd previously ignored or explained away. Daniel's phone buzzed constantly with text messages. When I asked who was texting so frequently, he'd say it was coworkers checking on his recovery, but tech companies don't typically send messages at midnight that make someone smile the way Daniel smiled when he read them. He left the house for mysterious errands, picking up prescriptions that never seemed to make it home, meeting with old friends I'd never heard him mention in 15 years of marriage, attending follow-up appointments that he insisted I didn't need to accompany him to despite my nursing background. "You need to focus on your own recovery," he'd say, kissing my cheek with lips that now tasted like lies. One afternoon, while Daniel was at another mysterious appointment, I gathered the strength to search our home office. My incision protested with every movement, but something deeper than physical pain was driving me forward. In the back of his desk drawer, behind old tax documents and computer cables, I found a small velvet jewelry box I'd never seen before. Inside was an engagement ring that took my breath away. A massive emerald-cut diamond surrounded by smaller stones, the kind of ring that costs more than I made in a year as a nurse. There was an inscription inside the band that made my world tilt sideways. "For my beloved Jessica, forever and always, D." Jessica. The mystery woman had a name. I put the ring back exactly where I'd found it, but not before taking a picture with my phone. Then I spent the rest of the afternoon sitting in our kitchen, staring at the photograph and trying to process the magnitude of what I was looking at. Daniel wasn't just having an affair. He was planning to marry someone else. He was planning to marry someone else with the healthy kidney I had given him, the new lease on life that had come from my body. When he came home that evening, carrying takeout from our favorite Thai restaurant on Grand Avenue, I watched him with completely different eyes. He moved with more energy than he'd had in months, like a man who'd been given not just a new kidney, but an entirely new future. The question was whether that future included me at all. "How was your appointment?" I asked, as we ate pad thai from cardboard containers at our kitchen table. "Fine," he said, without looking up from his food. "Doctor, Rodriguez says the kidney is functioning perfectly. My creatinine levels are the best they've been in years." "That's wonderful," I said, and I meant it, despite everything that was unraveling between us. Whatever was happening in our marriage, I was still glad he was healthy. But then he added, "He says I should be able to travel within a month or two. Maybe we could finally take that trip to Ireland we've always talked about." The casual lie was so smooth, so practiced, that it literally took my breath away. We weren't taking any trip to Ireland together. He was going to Ireland with Jessica, probably on their honeymoon, using the health I had given him to start their new life together. That night, I lay awake in our bed while Daniel slept in the guest room, listening to the familiar sounds of our old house settling around us and making a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to confront him directly, not yet. Instead, I was going to become a detective in my own life, gathering evidence and planning my response. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. The following Tuesday, Daniel announced he had to go to Seattle for a work conference, something about new software implementations that would affect his company's biggest clients. He'd be gone for 4 days, he said, and did I feel strong enough to be alone? "Of course," I told him. "I'm feeling much better." This was partially true. Physically, I was healing well. The surgical site was no longer the dominant feature of my existence, though it still ached when I moved wrong or tried to lift anything heavier than a coffee cup. Emotionally, I felt like I was made of broken glass held together with surgical tape. I helped him pack, watching as he folded dress shirts with unusual care and packed cologne I'd never seen before. When he kissed me goodbye, I could taste guilt on his lips like copper pennies. "I'll call you every night," he promised. "Have a safe trip," I said, and waved from our front porch as he pulled out of our driveway in the Honda Civic we'd bought together 3 years ago. As soon as his car disappeared around the corner onto Lyndale Avenue, I went inside and called my sister Margaret in Denver. "I need you to do something for me," I said without preamble when she answered. "Can you run a background check on someone?" Margaret worked in corporate security for a major insurance company and had access to databases that ordinary people could only dream of. We'd always been close, but I'd been so consumed with Daniel's illness over the past year that I'd let our relationship drift more than I should have. "Catherine, what's going on? You sound terrible." So I told her everything: the surgery, the woman in the hospital, the engagement ring, the lies about work trips. By the time I finished, I was crying so hard I could barely speak. "Oh, honey," Margaret said softly. "I'm so sorry. What's the woman's name?" "Jessica," I managed through my tears. "I don't know her last name, but she drives a silver Lexus and she's been wearing my jewelry." "Give me 24 hours, Margaret said. "I'll find out everything there is to know about this woman." While I waited for Margaret to call back, I conducted my own investigation. I went through Daniel's desk more thoroughly than I ever had before, looking for anything I might have missed. In a folder labeled Insurance Documents, I found printed emails between Daniel and Jessica dating back 10 months, well before his kidney diagnosis. The emails were explicit, both sexually and emotionally. They called each other pet names that made my stomach turn. They made plans for a future that clearly didn't include me. Most devastating of all, they talked about waiting for the right time to end Daniel's marriage once his health situation was resolved. They had been planning this for almost a year. Daniel had been planning to leave me even before I agreed to give him my kidney. He had used my love for him, my willingness to sacrifice my own health for his, as a bridge to his new life with another woman. I found hotel receipts for weekend trips I'd thought were work-related, credit card statements showing expensive dinners and jewelry purchases I'd known nothing about, a lease agreement for a downtown Minneapolis condo that Daniel had apparently signed 3 weeks ago while I was still recovering from surgery. The evidence painted a picture so clear and so devastating that I had to sit on our bathroom floor and put my head between my knees to keep from fainting. My phone rang around 10 o'clock that night. It was Margaret. "I found her," she said without preamble. "Jessica Marie Thornton, 36 years old, works as a marketing director for a pharmaceutical company. She's been divorced twice, no children. And Catherine, she has a history." "What kind of history?" "She's done this before. Both of her previous marriages ended when she had affairs with married men who left their wives for her. There are social media posts, court documents from messy divorces. This woman has a pattern of targeting married men, especially men with money or status." I closed my eyes and leaned against our kitchen counter, feeling like the floor was dissolving beneath my feet. "There's more," Margaret continued. "I found property records showing that Daniel has been financially supporting her for months. He's been paying her rent, her car payments, even her credit card bills. Catherine, he's been using your joint savings account to fund his affair." The betrayal was so complete, so calculated that I couldn't even cry. I just sat there holding the phone, listening to my sister's voice fade in and out like a radio with poor reception. "What should I do?" I finally whispered. "That depends," Margaret said carefully. "Do you want to save your marriage, or do you want to destroy him?" I thought about Daniel sleeping in a Seattle hotel room, probably with Jessica beside him. I thought about the kidney that was keeping him alive, the piece of my body that was now functioning inside his. I thought about 15 years of marriage, of Sunday mornings and shared dreams, and the life we'd built together in our creaky old house. And then I thought about the engagement ring hidden in his desk drawer. "I want to destroy him," I said quietly. "Good," Margaret replied, "because I have some ideas." The plan we developed over the next 2 days was elegant in its simplicity. Instead of confronting Daniel directly or filing for divorce immediately, we were going to let him hang himself with his own lies. Margaret used her corporate connections to track Daniel's actual whereabouts during his business trip. He wasn't in Seattle at all. He was at a luxury resort in Napa Valley with Jessica, apparently celebrating his successful recovery and their upcoming engagement. While he was gone, I hired a private investigator recommended by Margaret's company. Within 48 hours, I had photographic evidence of Daniel and Jessica together, copies of their text message exchanges, and detailed financial records showing exactly how much of our money he'd been spending on his mistress. But the most devastating evidence came from an unexpected source. I was going through Daniel's laptop, something I'd never done in 15 years of marriage, when I found a folder buried deep in his documents labeled insurance claims. Inside were copies of emails between Daniel and Jessica discussing their plan in clinical detail. They had researched kidney transplant procedures extensively. They knew that spouses were often the best matches for organ donation. They had actually planned for Daniel to seduce me into giving him my kidney, then leave me for Jessica once he was healthy. There was an email from Jessica dated 2 weeks before Daniel's diagnosis that read, "Once she gives you the kidney and you're recovered, we can finally be together. She'll be devastated, but she'll get over it eventually. And legally, she can't take the kidney back." They had researched the legal implications. They knew that once the transplant was complete, there was nothing I could do to reverse it, no way to reclaim the piece of myself I'd given him out of love. They had used my love as a weapon against me. I printed every email, every text message, every piece of evidence I could find. Then I sat in our kitchen, the same kitchen where Daniel had spun me around in joy when we learned I was a compatible donor, and planned his destruction. When Daniel returned from his fake business trip on Saturday afternoon, I was waiting for him with homemade lasagna and a bottle of his favorite wine. He looked tanned and relaxed, like a man who'd spent 4 days at a luxury resort rather than in boring conference rooms. "How was Seattle?" I asked, kissing his cheek as he set down his suitcase. "Exhausting," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "But productive. Lots of new developments in the industry." I nodded sympathetically and served him dinner, listening as he spun elaborate lies about presentations he'd attended and colleagues he'd met. Every word was fiction, and he delivered each lie with the confidence of a man who thought he was smarter than everyone around him. "You look good," I told him as we ate. "Rested. The trip must have agreed with you." "Yeah, I think I'm finally feeling like my old self again," he said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "Thanks to you. I know I've said it before, but I can never thank you enough for what you gave me." The irony was so bitter I almost laughed out loud. After dinner, Daniel went to his desk to catch up on some work emails. I watched him from the kitchen doorway as he checked to make sure the engagement ring was still hidden in his drawer. He had no idea that I'd already photographed it, along with everything else. "I'm going to bed early," I announced, still getting tired easily. "Of course," he said, looking up from his computer with what he probably thought was a concerned expression. "You should rest. Your body's been through a lot." "Yes," I agreed. "It has." The next morning was Sunday, and Daniel suggested we go for a walk around Lake Harriet like we used to do before his illness. It was a beautiful October day, with the maple trees showing off their red and gold leaves and families enjoying what might be one of the last warm weekends before winter. "I've been thinking," Daniel said as we walked along the familiar path. "Maybe we should plan that trip to Ireland for next spring. I should be completely recovered by then, and we could both use a vacation after everything we've been through." I nodded and smiled, letting him spin his fantasy about our future together while I thought about the evidence hidden in our home office. "That sounds wonderful," I said. "I'll start looking at flights and hotels." That evening, after Daniel went to bed, I made 3 phone calls. The first was to a divorce attorney Margaret had recommended. The second was to Daniel's employer to report the fraudulent expense claims he'd been submitting for his fake business trips. The third was to Jessica's employer to report her relationship with a married man whose company was a vendor to her pharmaceutical firm, a clear conflict of interest that violated their corporate ethics policy. Then I sat down at my computer and began typing. I wrote a detailed account of everything that had happened, from Daniel's diagnosis through his recovery, and my discovery of his betrayal. I included dates, times, and photographic evidence. I wrote about the kidney I'd given him and the way they had planned to use my love as a stepping stone to their future together. But I didn't send it to a lawyer or a judge. I sent it to Daniel's entire family, to Jessica's family, to both of their employers, and to every mutual friend we had in Minneapolis. I also posted it on social media, with all the evidence attached, under the simple title, "What Gratitude Looks Like." The response was immediate and devastating. Daniel's phone started ringing at 6 o'clock Monday morning and didn't stop. His mother called, crying, demanding to know if what I'd written was true. His brother called from Portland, furious about the family embarrassment. His co-workers called, confused about the ethics investigation that had been opened into his conduct. Jessica's phone was apparently ringing too, because by 8 o'clock Monday morning, Daniel was pacing our kitchen like a caged animal, alternately trying to call her and getting voicemail, then trying to call lawyers and getting busy signals. "Catherine," he said when he finally noticed I was sitting at our kitchen table, calmly drinking coffee and reading the Minneapolis Star-Tribune. "We need to talk." I looked up from the newspaper and smiled. "Do we? What about?" "You know what about. The things you posted online, the emails you sent. You can't just destroy people's lives because you're upset." "Upset?" I repeated the word like I was tasting something new. "Is that what you think this is about?" Daniel sat down across from me at the table where we'd shared thousands of meals over 15 years of marriage. "Look, I know this looks bad," he began. "But you don't understand the whole situation." "I understand it perfectly," I said, still smiling. "You and Jessica planned this entire thing. You researched kidney transplants. You planned to use my love for you to get the organ you needed, and then you were going to leave me once you were healthy. You used my body as a means to your end." Daniel's face went white. "How did you... We never... That's not what happened." I pulled out my phone and showed him the email Jessica had sent about not being able to take the kidney back once the transplant was complete. "This is what happened," I said. "You both calculated that my love for you was worth one healthy kidney and a clean escape to your new life. The only thing you didn't calculate was that I might be smarter than you thought I was." Daniel stared at the phone screen, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "Catherine, please," he finally whispered. "I know I made mistakes, but we can work through this. We can go to counseling. I can end things with Jessica." I laughed, and the sound was sharp enough to cut glass. "End things with Jessica? Daniel, you bought her an engagement ring. You signed a lease on a condo for the two of you. You've been planning your wedding while I was recovering from surgery to save your life." I stood up from the table, and for the first time since this whole nightmare began, I felt powerful. "Here's what's going to happen," I said. "You're going to pack your things and leave this house today. You're going to find yourself a lawyer because I'm filing for divorce and I'm going to take you for everything you're worth. You're going to explain to everyone in your life how you repaid the woman who gave you a kidney by trying to steal her savings and destroy her trust." Daniel was crying now, ugly sobs that shook his whole body. "Please," he begged. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. It wasn't supposed to happen like this." "You're right," I agreed. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this. You were supposed to get away with it. You were supposed to ride off into the sunset with Jessica, living happily ever after with my kidney and my money and my love. But you're not as smart as you thought you were." My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Margaret. "Jessica got fired this morning. Thought you'd want to know." I showed Daniel the message. "Looks like your girlfriend is going to need a new job," I said. "Good thing you two have been saving up for your future together." "Oh, wait. That was my money you were spending, wasn't it?" Daniel looked like he was going to be sick. "Catherine, please, I'll do anything. I'll give you everything. Just please don't destroy my life." I looked at this man I'd loved for 15 years, this man whose life I had literally saved with my own body, and felt nothing but contempt. "I'm not destroying your life, Daniel," I said quietly. "I'm just making sure everyone knows what kind of man you really are. The kind of man who would use his wife's love to steal her organs and her money." I walked to the front door and opened it. "Get out of my house," I said. "And Daniel? The next time you need a kidney, ask Jessica. I'm sure she'll be happy to help since you two are so devoted to each other." Daniel packed his things in silence, moving like a man in shock. When he was done, he stood in our doorway for a long moment, looking back at the house we'd shared for so many years. "I did love you," he said softly. "I want you to know that." "No," I replied. "You loved what I could give you. There's a difference." After he left, I sat in our living room and listened to the silence. It felt different from the comfortable quiet we'd shared before, not empty, but clean, like the air after a thunderstorm. My phone was still ringing constantly with calls from friends and family, reporters who had picked up the story from social media, and strangers offering support. The story of the woman who gave her husband a kidney only to discover his betrayal was spreading across the internet like wildfire. But the call that mattered most came Tuesday afternoon. It was from Dr. Rodriguez at the hospital. "Catherine," he said when I answered, "I heard about what happened. I'm so sorry." "Thank you," I said. "I appreciate that. I wanted you to know that what Daniel did doesn't change the fact that you saved a life," he continued. "The gift you gave, that was pure love. Don't let his betrayal diminish that." I closed my eyes and felt tears on my cheeks for the first time since I'd found the engagement ring. "It's hard to feel good about saving someone who was planning to destroy me," I admitted. "I understand," Dr. Rodriguez said gently. "But Catherine, you need to know something. The kidney you gave Daniel isn't just keeping him alive. It's functioning so well that his overall health is better than it's been in years. He has decades of life ahead of him now because of what you did." "And he's going to spend those decades with another woman," I said bitterly. "Maybe," Dr. Rodriguez agreed, "but he's also going to spend those decades knowing that every breath he takes is because of your love. He's going to wake up every morning for the rest of his life with a piece of you inside him, keeping him alive. There's no divorce from that, Catherine. There's no running away from that kind of debt." After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen thinking about what Dr. Rodriguez had said. Daniel would live for decades with my kidney inside him, a constant reminder of the love he'd thrown away. Every time he looked in the mirror, every time he felt healthy and strong, he'd have to remember what he'd cost himself for a woman who got fired from her job for sleeping with a married man. The divorce proceedings moved quickly, helped along by the mountain of evidence I'd gathered and the public nature of Daniel's betrayal. His lawyer advised him to accept whatever terms I offered, since fighting would only mean more public exposure of his crimes. I got the house, most of our savings, and half of his retirement accounts. Daniel got his new kidney and his new life with Jessica, along with a reputation that followed him wherever he went in Minneapolis. 3 months after Daniel moved out, I was sitting on my front porch on a warm January afternoon, a rare gift in Minnesota winter, when my neighbor Mrs. Anderson came over with a plate of cookies. "How are you doing, dear?" she asked, settling into the wicker chair beside mine. "Better," I said, and realized it was true. "Much better." "Good," she said firmly. "That man never deserved you anyway. Anyone with eyes could see that." I looked at her in surprise. "Really?" "Oh, honey, yes. You were always the one taking care of everything. The house, the relationship, his health. He just took and took and took. I'm glad you finally saw it too." That night, I called my sister Margaret. "How are you holding up?" she asked. "I think I'm okay," I said. "Actually, I think I might be better than okay." "Good. You deserve to be happy, Catherine. You deserve someone who loves you enough to give you their kidney, not someone who takes yours and runs." After we hung up, I walked through my house now, not ours, and felt something I hadn't experienced in months: peace. The physical scar from my surgery was healing well, fading from an angry red line to a thin pink mark that would probably disappear entirely within a year. The emotional scars would take longer, but I could feel them healing too. I was 48 years old, healthy, financially secure, and free from a man who had seen my love as something to be exploited rather than cherished. For the first time in months, the future felt full of possibilities instead of threats. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. For a moment, I thought it might be Daniel, trying to contact me despite the restraining order I'd filed. But when I opened it, I found something completely different. "Hi, Catherine. My name is Amanda Rodriguez. I'm Dr. Rodriguez's daughter. He told me about your situation, and I wanted to reach out. I'm a nurse, too, and I just went through a divorce myself. I know we don't know each other, but if you ever want to talk to someone who understands, I'm here. Sometimes it helps to know you're not alone." I stared at the message for a long time, thinking about the kindness of strangers and the unexpected ways that healing can begin. I typed back, "Thank you, Amanda. I would like that very much." As winter slowly gave way to spring in Minneapolis, I began to rebuild my life piece by piece. I went back to work at the hospital, where my colleagues treated me like a hero rather than a victim. I started taking yoga classes to help with the lingering soreness from surgery. I planted a garden in my backyard, filling it with flowers I'd always wanted but Daniel had never liked. One afternoon in May, while I was kneeling in the dirt planting tomatoes, my phone rang. It was Daniel. I stared at his name on the screen for a long moment, then answered. "What do you want, Daniel?" "I wanted to apologize," he said, his voice small and distant. "I know it's too late, and I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I needed to tell you how sorry I am." I sat back on my heels, dirt still clinging to my hands, and listened. "Things didn't work out with Jessica," he continued. "After she lost her job, she blamed me for everything. She said I'd ruined her life. She moved back to her parents' house in Ohio last month." I felt no satisfaction in this news, just a kind of tired sadness. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and meant it. "Catherine, I know I don't deserve to ask this, but do you think you could ever forgive me?" I looked at the garden I was planting, at the life I was building with my own hands, at the future that stretched ahead of me like an open road. "I already have forgiven you, Daniel," I said. "Not for your sake, but for mine. Carrying anger around is too heavy, and I'm done carrying your weight." There was silence on the other end of the line. "But Daniel," I added, "forgiveness doesn't mean I trust you. It doesn't mean I want you in my life. It just means I'm not going to let what you did poison my future." "I understand," he whispered. I want you to know that I wake up every day knowing what I lost. I had everything with you, and I threw it away for nothing." "Yes," I agreed. "You did." After I hung up, I sat in my garden for a long time, listening to the sounds of my neighborhood coming back to life after the long Minnesota winter. Children playing in nearby yards, lawnmowers starting up for the first season, the distant sound of an ice cream truck playing its cheerful melody. I thought about the kidney that was keeping Daniel alive somewhere across the city, the piece of my body that would outlive our marriage and probably outlive me. In a strange way, it was the most permanent thing I'd ever given anyone, more lasting than love, more enduring than vows. But it was also a gift that had revealed the true nature of the man I'd given it to. And in the end, maybe that was the most valuable thing it could have done for me. 6 months later, I was promoted to head nurse of my unit at the hospital. A year later, I started dating Amanda Rodriguez, who turned out to be as kind and generous as her father. We took things slowly, both of us having learned hard lessons about trust and love. But there was something healing about building a relationship with someone who understood both the medical and emotional complexities of what I'd been through. 2 years after the divorce was finalized, I received an invitation to Daniel's wedding. He was marrying someone new, a woman named Sarah, who worked as a teacher and had no idea about his history with kidney donation or betrayal. I threw the invitation away without opening it, but not before noticing that it was postmarked from Denver. Apparently, Daniel had decided he needed a fresh start in a new city, away from the reputation he'd built for himself in Minneapolis. I hoped this Sarah was smarter than I had been. I hoped she would demand to see his medical records before agreeing to marry him, would insist on meeting his ex-wife, would ask the hard questions about why his first marriage had ended. But mostly, I hoped she would never find herself in a position where she needed to give him a piece of her body to prove her love. 3 years after giving Daniel my kidney, I was asked to speak at a medical conference about organ donation between spouses. I talked about the medical aspects, the recovery process, and the importance of psychological support for donors. But I also talked about the need for additional safeguards to protect donors from exploitation, about the vulnerability that comes with literally giving a piece of yourself to another person. Love should never be a prerequisite for organ donation, I concluded my speech. And organ donation should never be used as proof of love. The two things exist independently, and when we conflate them, we create opportunities for the kind of abuse that I experienced. The response was overwhelming. Medical professionals, patients, and donor families reached out to share their own stories, many of them eerily similar to mine. I realized that what had happened to me wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a larger pattern of exploitation that the medical community needed to address. I started working with transplant centers to develop better screening processes for potential donors, protocols that would identify relationship problems or coercion before surgery rather than after. It became a passion project that grew into a consulting business, helping hospitals across the country develop more comprehensive donor protection programs. 5 years after the surgery that changed my life, I was featured in a national magazine article about organ donation and domestic abuse. The reporter asked me if I regretted giving Daniel my kidney, knowing what I know now. I thought about the question for a long time before answering. I regret that he wasn't the man I thought he was, I said finally. I regret that he used my love as a weapon against me. But I don't regret saving his life. That kidney has given him decades of healthy living, and what he does with those decades is his choice. I just hope he does something worthwhile with the gift I gave him. The reporter pressed further. But don't you feel angry that he's living a good life with your kidney while you've had to rebuild everything from scratch? I smiled at that, thinking of Amanda sleeping peacefully in the bed we now shared, of the work I was doing to protect other donors, of the garden blooming outside our kitchen window. I think you misunderstand, I said. I didn't rebuild my life from scratch. I built a completely new life, one that's more authentic and fulfilling than anything I had before. Daniel took my kidney, but he gave me something even more valuable in return. He showed me who I really was when everything else was stripped away. And who is that? Someone stronger than I ever imagined, I said. Someone who could survive having her love used against her and still believe in love itself. Someone who could give a piece of her body to save another person and not regret it, even when that person betrayed her trust. I paused, thinking of all the donors I'd worked with over the years, all the people who had made the same choice I had made, to give a piece of themselves to save another person, knowing the risks, but choosing love anyway. The kidney I gave Daniel wasn't just an organ, I continued. It was a test of character, both his and mine. He failed that test, but I passed it. And that's something no one can ever take away from me. I gave him my kidney, and he repaid me with divorce papers. Parte 2. 7 years after I gave Daniel my kidney, I was standing in the lobby of the Four Seasons Hotel in Denver, wearing a black cocktail dress and feeling like I was about to commit the perfect crime. The invitation in my purse was addressed to Catherine Mitchell and Guest, my maiden name, which I'd reclaimed after the divorce. It was an invitation to Daniel's company's annual awards banquet, where he was being honored as Employee of the Year for his outstanding work in their Denver office. What Daniel didn't know was that his new employer had hired my consulting firm to review their employee wellness programs, including their policies around medical leave and spousal organ donation. What he also didn't know was that I'd spent the last 6 months carefully orchestrating this moment. The woman standing beside me in the elegant hotel lobby was Amanda Rodriguez, No longer just my girlfriend, but my wife of 2 years and my business partner in more ways than one. She looked stunning in a midnight blue dress that complemented her dark hair, but more importantly, she looked determined. "Are you sure about this?" she asked quietly, adjusting the small recording device hidden in her purse. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," I replied, thinking of all the sleepless nights that had led to this moment. The plan had started forming 3 years ago when I received a phone call that changed everything I thought I knew about my story with Daniel. It was a Tuesday morning in November, and I was in my home office reviewing donor protection protocols when my phone rang. The caller ID showed an unknown Colorado number. "Is this Catherine Mitchell?" a woman's voice asked when I answered. "Yes, this is Catherine." "My name is Linda Patterson, and I think we need to talk. It's about Daniel Foster, your ex-husband." My blood turned cold. Daniel had been out of my life for 3 years at that point, and I'd worked hard to keep it that way. "What about him?" I asked carefully. "I'm his ex-fiancée," Linda said, and I heard her voice crack slightly. "I just found out about what he did to you, and I think he's doing it to someone else." I sat down heavily in my desk chair. "What do you mean?" "There's a woman here in Denver named Sarah Chen. She's a kindergarten teacher, really sweet, completely trusting. She's been dating Daniel for about a year, and last month she agreed to marry him." "Okay," I said slowly, not sure where this conversation was heading. "Catherine, she's also agreed to give him her kidney." The world tilted sideways. "That's impossible," I said. "Daniel got my kidney. His kidney function should be fine now." "That's what I thought too," Linda said. "But I did some digging after we broke up. I was angry and wanted to hurt him, if I'm being honest. I found out that Daniel has been lying about his medical condition. The kidney you gave him is failing." I felt like I was going to be sick. "What do you mean, failing?" "I mean, he's been in kidney failure again for over a year," Linda explained. "Apparently, he never followed the proper medical protocols after the transplant. He didn't take his anti-rejection medications consistently. He drank heavily. He ignored follow-up appointments. Your kidney started rejecting within 18 months of the surgery." I stared at my computer screen, trying to process what I was hearing. "So he needs another transplant," I said slowly. "Yes, and he's found another woman who loves him enough to give him one of her kidneys, just like you did. Except this time, he's not even bothering to marry her first. He's planning to take her kidney and then disappear." The rage that filled me in that moment was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It wasn't the clean anger I'd felt when I discovered Daniel's affair. This was something deeper and more primal, like a wildfire spreading through every cell in my body. "How do you know all this?" I asked. "Because I used to work at the hospital where he's being treated," Linda explained. "I still have friends there who told me what was really going on when I started asking questions. Catherine, this man has turned organ donation into his personal scam. He finds women who love him, gets them to give him their kidneys, then moves on to the next victim when his body rejects the transplant." I closed my eyes and thought about Dr. Rodriguez's words from years ago. "He's going to wake up every morning for the rest of his life with a piece of you inside him." Except that piece of me was dead now, killed by Daniel's negligence and selfishness. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because I think you're the only person who can stop him," Linda said. "You've been through this before. You know how he operates. And from what I've read about your work with donor protection, you have the resources to expose him. What about Sarah? Have you tried to warn her?" Linda's laugh was bitter. "I tried. She thinks I'm a jealous ex trying to sabotage her relationship. Daniel's painted me as unstable and vindictive. She won't listen to anything I say." I spent the rest of that day researching everything I could find about Daniel's life in Denver. He'd reinvented himself completely. New job, new friends, new identity as a tragic widower whose first wife had died in a car accident shortly after saving his life with a kidney donation. The lie was so audacious, so completely fabricated, that I almost admired his creativity. He turned me into a convenient dead woman, a saint who couldn't contradict his story or expose his lies. But Sarah Chen was very much alive, and according to the research I was able to do through my professional contacts, she was scheduled to undergo kidney donation surgery in 6 weeks. That night, I called Amanda into my office and showed her everything I'd discovered. "He's going to kill that woman," Amanda said, after reading through the medical reports Linda had sent me. "Not kill," I corrected. "But he's going to take a piece of her body under false pretenses, then abandon her when she's most vulnerable, just like he did to me." Amanda was quiet for a long moment, then asked the question I'd been dreading. "What are we going to do about it?" I looked at my wife, this brilliant, compassionate woman who had helped me heal from the deepest betrayal I'd ever experienced, and made a decision that would change both of our lives. "We're going to destroy him," I said simply. "Not just stop him, but completely destroy his ability to ever do this to anyone else." The plan we developed over the following weeks was complex and risky, but it was also foolproof in its simplicity. Instead of trying to convince Sarah that Daniel was lying, something Linda had already attempted unsuccessfully, we were going to let Daniel expose himself. Amanda used her connections in the medical community to get hired as a temporary nursing consultant at the Denver hospital where Daniel was being treated. Her job was to observe and document everything about his case while staying completely invisible to Daniel himself. Meanwhile, I began reaching out to my network of contacts in organ donation advocacy, medical ethics, and investigative journalism. I started building a case file that would be impossible to ignore once I was ready to go public. But the most important part of the plan was personal. I was going to confront Daniel face to face, not as his victim, but as his judge and jury. The opportunity came when Daniel's company announced their annual awards banquet. Through my consulting work, I'd learned that Daniel was being honored for his inspirational comeback from a life-threatening illness. The irony was too perfect to ignore. I used my professional credentials to get myself invited to the event as a guest speaker on corporate wellness programs. Daniel would be trapped in a room full of his colleagues and superiors, unable to run or hide when I revealed the truth about his inspirational comeback. Now, standing in the hotel lobby with Amanda beside me, I felt a calm certainty that I hadn't experienced since the day I'd decided to give Daniel my kidney all those years ago. "Catherine Mitchell?" A young woman in a hotel uniform approached us with a clipboard. "I'm Jessica, the event coordinator. We're so honored to have you speaking tonight about organ donation awareness." The name Jessica sent a chill down my spine. It was the same name as Daniel's first mistress, the woman who had cost me my marriage. But this Jessica was probably 25 years old and had no idea about the significance of her name in my story. "Thank you," I said, accepting the program she handed me. "I'm looking forward to sharing my experiences with your guests." As we walked toward the ballroom, I scanned the program and found Daniel's name listed as the Employee of the Year recipient. His bio described him as a dedicated family man who overcame a life-threatening kidney disease with the support of his loving wife, whose ultimate sacrifice saved his life. Even now, 7 years later, he was still using my kidney, my literal sacrifice, to build his reputation and advance his career. "There he is," Amanda whispered, nodding toward a table near the front of the room. Daniel looked older than I remembered, but healthier too. His face had filled out, and his color was good, the telltale signs of someone whose kidney function was actually excellent, not someone in need of another transplant. Sitting beside him was a petite Asian woman with kind eyes and a nervous smile. Sarah Chen, the kindergarten teacher who had no idea she was dating a professional con artist. "He looks good for someone whose kidney is supposedly failing," I murmured to Amanda. "That's because it's not failing," she replied quietly. "I reviewed his medical records yesterday. Your kidney is functioning perfectly. His creatinine levels are better than most people his age." I stared at Daniel across the crowded ballroom, processing this final piece of information. So he's not sick at all. Not even a little bit. This whole thing, the engagement to Sarah, the planned kidney donation, it's all completely unnecessary from a medical standpoint. He's doing this because he can, because he's gotten away with it before. The rage I felt in that moment was cold and calculating, like ice forming over a deep lake. Daniel wasn't just a man who had betrayed his wife and abandoned his mistress. He wasn't even just a man who had abused the organ donation system to get what he wanted. A predator who used women's love and compassion as weapons against them, who literally consumed pieces of their bodies to fuel his own selfish desires. And he was about to do it again. The dinner portion of the evening passed in a blur of small talk and networking. I smiled and made conversation with Daniel's colleagues, many of whom had heard the story of his miraculous recovery thanks to his late wife's sacrifice. "You must have such admiration for what Mrs. Foster did," one woman said to me during the cocktail hour. "Giving her life to save her husband's. It's like something out of a movie." "Yes," I agreed. "It certainly is like something out of a movie." When it came time for the awards presentation, I took my seat at the head table and watched as Daniel was called to the podium to receive his Employee of the Year award. He looked confident and comfortable as he accepted the crystal trophy, pausing to kiss Sarah's cheek before walking to the microphone. "Thank you so much for this honor," he began, his voice carrying easily across the silent ballroom. 7 years ago, I thought my life was over. I was in kidney failure, facing dialysis, and a long wait for a transplant that might never come. I gripped Amanda's hand under the table, feeling my heart rate spike as Daniel launched into the story I knew so well. "But I was blessed to have a wife who loved me more than her own life," he continued, his voice taking on the practiced cadence of a man who had told this story many times before. "Catherine didn't hesitate when the doctors said I needed a kidney transplant. She volunteered immediately, even knowing the risks to her own health." Around the room, I could see people dabbing at their eyes with napkins. Daniel's story was indeed moving, when you didn't know it was built on lies. The surgery was successful, and I began to recover. But Catherine developed complications, an infection that the doctors couldn't control. She died 3 weeks after the transplant, but not before she made me promise to live a full and meaningful life with the gift she had given me. The room was completely silent now, hanging on every word of Daniel's fictional tragedy. "I've tried to honor that promise every day since," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "I've tried to be worthy of her sacrifice, to build a life that would make her proud. And now, I'm blessed to have found love again with Sarah, who reminds me every day that life is precious and that love is the most powerful force in the world." Sarah was crying openly now, gazing at Daniel with the kind of pure adoration I remembered feeling myself all those years ago. "So when I accept this award tonight," Daniel concluded, "I accept it not just for myself, but for Catherine, whose love continues to keep me alive every single day." The applause was thunderous. People were wiping away tears and looking at Daniel like he was some kind of saint, a man who had been tested by tragedy and emerged stronger and more compassionate. I waited for the applause to die down, then stood up and began walking toward the podium. "Actually," I said, my voice cutting through the lingering whispers, "I think there might be some confusion about that story." Daniel looked up and saw me approaching, and I watched all the color drain from his face. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, taking the microphone from Daniel's suddenly nerveless fingers, "my name is Catherine Mitchell. I was formerly Catherine Foster, Daniel's wife, and I have some corrections to make to the story you just heard." The ballroom erupted in confused murmurs. Daniel stood frozen beside me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "First," I said, my voice calm and clear, "I'm not dead. As you can see, I'm very much alive and in excellent health." I paused to let this sink in. "Second, while it's true that I gave Daniel one of my kidneys 7 years ago, I didn't die from complications afterward. I divorced him when I discovered that he had been planning his affair and his abandonment of me even before the transplant surgery took place. The murmurs were getting louder now, and I could see people pulling out their phones to record what was happening. But most importantly, I continued, the kidney I gave Daniel 7 years ago is functioning perfectly. His medical records, which I have copies of right here, show that he has absolutely no need for another kidney transplant. I pulled out a folder of documents and held it up for the room to see. Which makes his engagement to Sarah Chen and her agreement to donate her kidney to him not just unnecessary, but fraudulent. The room exploded in gasps and exclamations. Sarah stood up from her chair, looking back and forth between me and Daniel with growing horror on her face. "Daniel," she said, her voice barely audible over the crowd noise. "What is she talking about?" Daniel finally found his voice. "Sarah, don't listen to her. She's mentally ill. She's been stalking me for years, trying to destroy my life because she can't accept that our marriage is over." I smiled at that, remembering how he'd used the same strategy with Linda Patterson. "That's an interesting theory, Daniel," I said, "but I think these medical records from Denver General Hospital might tell a different story." I opened the folder and began reading from the top document. Patient, Daniel Robert Foster. Current kidney function, normal. Creatinine levels, 1.1 mg/dl, well within normal range. Anti-rejection medications, discontinued 18 months ago due to excellent graft function. Prognosis, no medical intervention required. The silence in the room was deafening. "Would you like me to continue reading?" I asked Daniel. "Because I have 7 years' worth of medical records here that document your perfect kidney function and your complete lack of need for another transplant." Sarah was staring at Daniel with a look of dawning comprehension and betrayal. "You told me you were dying," she whispered. "You said the kidney was failing and you'd die without another transplant." "Sarah, I can explain," Daniel began. "Actually," I interrupted, "let me explain. Because I think Sarah deserves to know the whole truth about the man she's about to marry." I turned to address the room, but my words were really for Sarah. "Daniel Foster is a serial organ donation scammer," I said clearly. "He targets kind, loving women, convinces them that he's dying and needs their kidneys to survive, then abandons them once he's recovered from surgery. He did it to me 7 years ago, and he was planning to do it to Sarah next month." I pulled out my phone and displayed a photo I'd taken from Linda Patterson. "This is Linda Patterson, Daniel's ex-fiancée from Denver. She was supposed to give him her kidney 2 years ago until she discovered that he was already healthy and was planning to disappear after the surgery." Sarah sank back into her chair, her hand pressed to her mouth. "The pattern is always the same," I continued. "He finds successful, compassionate women with stable careers and good health insurance. He makes them fall in love with him, then reveals his tragic medical condition. He plays on their love and their natural desire to help, convincing them that only they can save his life." I looked directly at Daniel, who was standing frozen at the podium like a deer in headlights. "What makes this particularly heinous is that Daniel doesn't just steal these women's organs," I said. "He steals their stories. He turns their love and sacrifice into his own personal mythology, using their gifts to build his reputation and advance his career." I gestured to the Employee of the Year trophy sitting abandoned on the podium. This award was given to Daniel based on his inspirational comeback from kidney disease, a comeback that was only possible because of my kidney and my sacrifice. But instead of honoring that gift, he's used it to deceive Sarah and countless others. Sarah finally found her voice. "The surgery is scheduled for next week," she said, her voice hollow with shock. "I know," I said gently. "That's why I'm here tonight. To make sure it doesn't happen." I turned back to the stunned audience. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want to be very clear about something. Organ donation is one of the most generous and life-saving gifts one human being can give to another. I don't regret giving Daniel my kidney, even knowing what I know now, because the act itself was pure love." I paused, letting my words settle over the room. But organ donation should never be based on lies. It should never be used as a tool of manipulation or abuse, and it should never be taken from someone under false pretenses. I looked at Daniel one more time. The kidney I gave you 7 years ago wasn't just an organ, Daniel. It was a test of your character. And you failed that test in every possible way. Daniel finally seemed to come back to life. You can't prove any of this, he said desperately. These are just accusations from bitter ex-girlfriends. I smiled and nodded to Amanda, who had been recording everything on her phone. Actually, I can prove all of it, I said, because I've spent the last 3 years documenting every lie you've told, every woman you've targeted, every medical record you've falsified. I held up a thick manila envelope. Thick manila. This contains copies of all your medical records from the past 7 years, documentation of your fraudulent insurance claims, evidence of your identity fraud in claiming I was dead, and sworn statements from Linda Patterson and 2 other women you attempted to scam in Phoenix and Seattle. The room was completely silent now, everyone hanging on every word. But more than that, I continued, it contains evidence of something even more serious. Because what you've been doing, Daniel, isn't just morally reprehensible, it's criminal fraud. Specifically, it's healthcare fraud, insurance fraud, and conspiracy to commit assault. Daniel's face went white. That's not... You can't. Actually, I can, I said calmly, because taking someone's organ under false pretenses isn't just a betrayal, it's assault with a deadly weapon, and doing it repeatedly across state lines makes it a federal crime. I pulled out my phone and showed the screen to the room. Which is why, before I came here tonight, I filed a formal complaint with the FBI's Healthcare Fraud Unit. They're very interested in your case, Daniel. Apparently, medical identity theft and serial organ donation fraud are new crimes they're eager to prosecute. Sarah was sobbing now, her hands covering her face. I walked over to her table and knelt beside her chair. Sarah, I said softly, I know this is overwhelming. But you need to know that none of this is your fault. You're not naive or stupid for believing him. You're compassionate and loving, and he exploited those beautiful qualities. She looked up at me with tear-filled eyes. I was going to give him my kidney next week, she whispered. I know, I said, but you're not going to do that now, because now you know the truth. I stood up and addressed the room one final time. I came here tonight not for revenge, but for justice. Daniel Foster has spent 7 years using my kidney, my literal life force, to build a reputation based on lies. He's used that reputation to target and manipulate other women, and he was weeks away from successfully scamming another innocent person out of her organs. I looked around the room at Daniel's colleagues and employers, people who had believed in his story and supported his career. I understand that this is shocking and disturbing, I said. But I hope you'll see this as an opportunity to examine your own policies around employee medical claims and to consider how you can better protect people from this kind of exploitation. I walked back to the podium and picked up the Employee of the Year trophy. This award was given to Daniel for his inspirational recovery from kidney disease, I said, holding it up for everyone to see. But the only thing inspirational about his story is the love and sacrifice of the women he's betrayed. I set the trophy down on Sarah's table. This belongs to you, I told her, and to Linda, and to every other woman who was strong enough to love someone more than herself. You're the real heroes in this story. As I walked back toward my table, the room remained in stunned silence. Daniel stood at the podium looking like a man whose entire world had just collapsed around him, which I supposed it had. Amanda took my hand as I sat down beside her. How do you feel? She whispered. I looked around the room at the faces staring back at me, shocked, sympathetic, angry, confused. Then I looked at Sarah, who was being comforted by friends but was no longer in danger of losing a kidney to a man who didn't need it. Free, I said simply. For the first time in 7 years, I feel completely free. The aftermath was swift and decisive. Within an hour of my revelation, Daniel's employer had placed him on immediate suspension pending a full investigation. The hotel security had been called when Daniel became belligerent and tried to destroy the medical records I'd brought as evidence. Sarah's surgery was canceled, and she was referred to counseling services to help her process the psychological trauma of discovering she'd been manipulated into offering her organs to a healthy man. Most satisfying of all, the FBI moved quickly on the case. Within a week, Daniel was arrested on federal charges of healthcare fraud, mail fraud, and conspiracy to commit assault. The fact that he had committed these crimes across multiple states made it a federal matter, and the penalties were severe. But the legal consequences, while satisfying, weren't the most important outcome of that night. 3 days after the awards banquet, I received a phone call from a woman named Maria Santos in Phoenix. "I saw the video of what you did in Denver," she said when I answered. "It's been shared thousands of times on social media. I wanted to thank you for having the courage to speak up." "You're welcome," I said, though I wasn't sure why she was thanking me specifically. "I'm thanking you because Daniel tried to do the same thing to me 18 months ago," Maria explained. "I was engaged to him for 6 months, and I'd agreed to give him my kidney. But something felt wrong about the whole situation, so I broke off the engagement and moved to Los Angeles." My blood ran cold. "He was targeting you too?" "Yes, but I didn't have proof. I just had intuition that something wasn't right. When I saw your story, everything clicked into place. He'd told me his first wife had died in a car accident after giving him her kidney, and that the kidney was failing because of trauma from the accident." I closed my eyes, marveling at Daniel's creativity in crafting different versions of my death to suit his needs. "Are you okay?" I asked Maria. "Do you need any support or resources?" "I'm okay now," she said, "but I wanted you to know that you probably saved my life. If I'd gone through with the surgery and then discovered his lies afterward, I don't think I would have survived that kind of betrayal." Over the following weeks, I heard from 6 more women who had been targeted by Daniel over the years. Some had escaped before surgery, like Maria. Others had been in the early stages of the grooming process when he'd moved on to easier targets. The pattern was always the same: successful, compassionate women with stable careers and good health insurance. Women who were strong enough to make the sacrifice, but trusting enough to believe his lies. I started a support group for these women and eventually expanded it into a nonprofit organization focused on protecting organ donors from exploitation and fraud. We worked with hospitals to develop better screening processes, with law enforcement to identify and prosecute organ donation scams, and with victims to heal from the unique trauma of having their love and compassion weaponized against them. Sarah Chen became one of our most active advocates. She channeled her anger and betrayal into helping other potential victims, speaking at medical conferences and training sessions about the warning signs of organ donation fraud. "I keep thinking about how close I came," she told me during one of our support group meetings. "Not just to losing my kidney, but to losing my faith in love entirely. Daniel didn't just want to take my organ. He wanted to take my ability to trust and love again." "But he didn't succeed," I reminded her. "You're here, you're whole, and you're helping other people avoid the same trap. He failed to break you, just like he failed to break me." The trial was a media sensation. Daniel's case became a landmark prosecution that led to stronger federal laws around organ donation fraud and identity theft in medical contexts. I testified for 3 days, walking the jury through the entire timeline of my relationship with Daniel, the transplant surgery, and the discovery of his betrayal. But the most powerful testimony came from Sarah, who described the psychological manipulation Daniel had used to convince her to undergo surgery she didn't need to undergo. "He made me feel like I was the only thing standing between him and death," she testified. "He made me feel like my love wasn't real unless I was willing to give him a piece of my body. That's not love, that's exploitation of the deepest kind." Daniel was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison, with additional charges pending in 3 other states where he had attempted similar scams. But for me, the real victory wasn't his imprisonment. It was the changes we were able to make to the organ donation system itself. Working with transplant centers across the country, our organization helped develop new protocols that required psychological evaluation of both donors and recipients, mandatory waiting periods between the decision to donate and the surgery itself, and independent medical verification of the recipient's need for transplantation. These changes wouldn't have prevented someone like me from donating to someone like Daniel if our marriage had been genuine and his need had been real. But they would have caught the lies and manipulation that allowed him to exploit multiple women over the span of 7 years. 5 years after the Denver confrontation, I was invited to speak at the International Conference on Organ Donation Ethics. My keynote address was titled "Love as a Weapon: Protecting Donors from Emotional Exploitation." In the audience that day was Dr. Rodriguez, the transplant coordinator who had overseen my surgery all those years ago. After my speech, he approached me with tears in his eyes. "I need to apologize to you," he said. "We failed you in so many ways during that process. We should have seen the signs, should have protected you better." I shook my head. "You didn't fail me, Dr. Rodriguez. You saved Daniel's life with the tools and knowledge you had at the time. What happened afterward wasn't a medical failure. It was a character failure on Daniel's part. But if we'd had better protocols then maybe I would have been protected," I agreed. "But maybe some other woman wouldn't have been. Maybe Daniel would have just gotten better at hiding his lies or found victims outside the medical system entirely." I paused, thinking about all the women who had contacted me over the years, all the stories of manipulation and betrayal that went far beyond organ donation. "The truth is, predators like Daniel will always exist," I continued. "Our job isn't to prevent every possible betrayal. It's to create systems that catch as many of them as possible and to support the people who survive their attacks." Dr. Rodriguez nodded thoughtfully. "And you've done that. The protocols you helped develop have prevented dozens of fraudulent donations already." "Good," I said. "But more than that, we've created a community of survivors who know they're not alone. That might be the most important thing of all." That evening, Amanda and I had dinner at a restaurant overlooking the Denver skyline. It was the same city where Daniel had been planning his final scam, but it felt transformed by everything that had happened since then. "Do you ever regret it?" Amanda asked as we shared dessert and watched the sun set over the mountains. "Regret what? Exposing Daniel?" "No," she said. "Giving him your kidney in the first place, loving someone who was capable of what he did." I thought about the question, just as I had countless times over the years. "I regret that he wasn't worthy of the gift," I said finally. "But I don't regret giving it, because that kidney didn't just save his life, it revealed his character. And my character, too." I reached across the table and took Amanda's hand. If I hadn't gone through that experience, I never would have understood how strong I really was. I never would have found my calling in protecting other donors. And I never would have met you, Amanda smiled. "So you're saying Daniel did us a favor?" I laughed. "I'm saying Daniel taught me that love is the most powerful force in the world, not because it can save people who don't deserve saving, but because it can survive anything, even betrayal." I looked out at the city lights beginning to twinkle in the growing darkness. "That kidney is still out there somewhere," I said. "Still keeping him alive in his prison cell, still functioning perfectly despite everything he put it through. In a way, it's the ultimate victory. Every day he's alive is a reminder that love is stronger than hate, generosity is stronger than selfishness, and truth is stronger than lies." "Even when love is repaid with divorce papers?" Amanda asked, referencing the title that had started this whole story. "Especially then," I said, "because divorce papers are just legal documents. But love, real love, is written into the very cells of our bodies. It becomes part of us in ways that no court can dissolve and no betrayal can destroy." I squeezed Amanda's hand, thinking of all the women who had found the strength to leave dangerous relationships, all the donors who had been protected from exploitation, all the lives that had been saved by the systems we'd built together. Daniel thought he could take my kidney and throw away my love like it was garbage, I continued. But he was wrong. The love is still there, stronger than ever. It's just being directed toward people who deserve it now. As we walked back to our hotel that night, I felt the familiar ache in my abdomen where the surgical scar had long since faded to a thin white line. It was a phantom pain that still visited me sometimes, a reminder of the piece of myself I'd given away so many years ago. But tonight, for the first time, it didn't feel like loss. It felt like victory. Somewhere in a federal prison, Daniel Foster was living with my kidney, breathing with my gift, surviving on my love, whether he wanted to acknowledge it or not. And every day he remained alive was another day for him to consider the magnitude of what he'd thrown away. Meanwhile, I was here in Denver with my wife, having just delivered a keynote speech to hundreds of medical professionals who were implementing protocols that would protect countless future donors from experiencing what I had experienced. I had turned my trauma into triumph, my betrayal into purpose, my loss into gain. And that, I realized, was the most perfect revenge of all. The story that began with divorce papers hidden in a medical insurance folder had become something much larger. A movement, a mission, a testament to the indestructible power of love to transform even the darkest betrayal into something meaningful and beautiful. I had given Daniel my kidney, and he had repaid me with divorce papers. But in the end, I had repaid him with justice, protection for future victims, and a life so full of purpose and love that his betrayal had become nothing more than the opening chapter of a much larger story. And that story was far from over.